Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. So excited to have such a great crowd with us up in Logan this weekend. I'm Brian Carver. I'm a planner here in Logan at JUB Engineers, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Brandon Bell, our next speaker. So Brandon currently serves as the countywide planner here in Cache County, which means he works to find harmony between the county's long-range plan and local communities, small local communities within the county, whom he also works with to help develop their general plans. He is an accredited member of the Congress of New Urbanism, having earned his Form-Based Codes Initiative certificate. So he's kind of our local expert on all things form-based, and he graduated cum laude and with departmental honors from the Utah State University Department of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning, where he completed an extensive thesis on the relationship between walkable environments and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So today he's going to give us some insight into how we can expand ownership opportunity in walkable communities.
I think we'll try this. Try this mic. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that, and appreciate everyone taking the time to be here and expressing the interest. So, I'm an accredited member of the Congress for the New Urbanism. What that means to you is that, if you're not familiar with the Congress, is that I know about how to plan and design walkable communities. And as Brian said, I currently serve as the Cache County countywide planner, and feel honored to serve in both capacities. I want to start out with a quote that I think is really important, particular to the zeitgeist or the environment of planning in our time. We have a broad range of tools that we're sort of used to doing and used to using, but we're facing some limitations with those tools. And so my intent today is to broaden that tool set to address the challenges that we're facing today. And I think that's why imagination isn't more important than knowledge. This comes to us from Albert Einstein. Another quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that I also love is, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." I love this quote, and the reason why is because it doesn't just say that believe in their dreams. It believes in the people who believe in the beauty of their dreams. In order to truly believe in a dream, it needs to be beautiful. And I don't just mean physical beauty. What I'm talking about is a deeper level of beauty. As an example of this, I would refer you to the Constitution of the United States. Many people, it's an embodiment of amazing, wonderful principles that involve principles of equality, cooperation, human rights, and the ability to self-govern. And that's the type of beauty that I'm trying to address and share with you today. And one final quote: "The significant problems we have cannot be solved at the same level of thinking with which we created," also from Albert Einstein. And so my hope is that we can find a new level of thinking together. And this is my cell number. I'm a believer in the idea of max vulnerability. I want to hear your feedback. If you think this is horrible, you want to run me out of the room, then you can go for that, see how far you can get. But I'd love to have a conversation and hear where the weaknesses of my argument are, where the strengths are, and what you think you can add to that. So, and I'll show this number at the end of the presentation as well. So, Steve Waldrop addressed in his presentation the same data that I'm sharing with you here. What's most important is this number right here, which is as of 2022. What this means to you is that households earning the area median income, only 12% of home sales are affordable to them as of 2022, and that's probably gotten a little bit worse since that time. They just can't afford a home. And why that's important, again, this also was shared by Mr. Waldrop. The net worth of someone who is renting is, a median renter is $10,400, and the net worth of a homeowner earning the same income is $397,000. Not necessarily earning the same income, but just those who own versus rent. Why this also matters is we've hit a point in which you can be earning a very decent wage in our society, very good wage, and not able to afford a home, but also be earning enough that you can't qualify for any governmental assistance or subsidies to be able to get assistance for your housing. I would ask and present that today that the issue ultimately is not a matter of whether we should be looking at government assistance primarily, but whether we're creating a lack of supply or policy-based scarcity in our housing supply. So in order to understand the full situation, I'm going to give you some background, then we're going to talk about walkable communities, and I'm going to give you some more background, and we're going to talk about ownership types that are compatible with walkable communities. So this is the background. The Utah housing market, we're going to start in 2014, and you'll see why in a minute. The Utah housing market was quoted by Envision Utah as stating that it had been shifting to smaller lots, townhomes, and apartments. And 78% of Utahns wanted communities that include a full mix of these housing types, including single-family homes on a variety of lot sizes, townhomes, and apartments that match what Utahns want and can afford. They also wanted those housing options designed in a way that was convenient for walking, transit, and short drives to keep housing and transportation costs reasonable. On a national level, millennials were reporting the same thing. And sorry, this was both millennials as well as boomers. This was a combination of those two groups primarily. And so it transcended the age groups. The American dream for millennials on a national level in 2014 was also mentioned as transitioning from the white picket fence in the suburbs to the historic brownstone stoop and other moderate density dwelling types in the heart of the city. And they have strong lifestyle preferences which affect the design of cities and towns. Now, what's also interesting is so millennials moved to the more urban downtown areas, and at the same time, they delayed home buying for more than earlier generations. They had the same preferences as as their grandparents and wanted these townhomes more than the boomers did initially. And what it said in 2017 is that we could expect the homeownership rate to tick up and the suburbs to change to suit to their urban tastes. What they started to notice in 2017, in the 2000s to about 2014, they're saying, well, millennials just love the downtown areas all across the nation. 2017, they say, well, they're moving to the suburbs. What's going on here? And then starting in about 2020, what we start to hear is, well, they're moving to the suburbs, they're buying homes in the suburbs, and then in 2020, what the data starts to say is, well, they can't afford a home anywhere. Okay? So we're seeing this transition. And again, they drove this back to the cities movement. And what this case study from Boston stated that, this is from a study out of Boston, that it stated that they were more likely to move out of urban neighborhoods that had lower amounts of units that had less than 3 bedrooms. So one of the main reasons why they moved to the suburbs was they couldn't get enough bedrooms in their units. And if the metropolitan areas had higher amounts of bedrooms, they stayed in those areas at higher rates rather than moving to the suburbs. So that was one factor. The second factor was housing affordability. Basically the metro areas, the downtown urban cores were more expensive than the suburbs at that time. And then the third reason was, we'll get to in just a minute. So again, 2014, 62% of millennials preferred to live in the type of mixed-use communities found in urban centers on a national scale. And then in 2024, they had opted to leave those areas that had all these amenities to move to the suburbs, but for the sake of housing affordability and demand for larger homes. What this doesn't tell you that's important is they were not moving to any suburbs. They moved to suburbs specifically that were amenitized, had lifestyle centers, things that they had been used to in the urban areas. And so what I want to emphasize in this is that what I think happened really is that they, again, there was affordability, right-sized housing, and neighborhood amenities. They're sort of searching for this third alternative, but they're stuck with these two options, roughly speaking, due to what our zoning allows. So we have these sort of extreme ends. We have the urban core, and then we have the detached single-family homes that are available to them. And these, again, are the 3 reasons that they were given. And there's a fourth that we're going to discuss that we haven't been talking about quite a bit as much as I think we should. So what the data tells us is that the cities need to be more like suburbs and the suburbs need to be more like cities. And what I believe that indicates is that the millennials are searching for a third alternative between the downtown cores and the typical suburban core. They're having to make a false choice between these two extremes, and they're looking for a happy medium opportunity to get what they're looking for. And the reason why they're put in that predicament, in my understanding, is expressed very well by the Cache County Housing Task Force Crisis Report, and says we do not have a free market for housing. And when I read that, this was actually prior to my working for Cache County, and I just, I really zoned in on that and realized there's power in recognizing that housing is a market. And what, as government, we do, we set the parameters of that market. If we set the parameters of the market incorrectly, then we create artificial scarcity, and we need to be aware of that. And so we need to figure out very carefully what the public interest is in our zoning so that we can set the right parameters and deliver housing abundance instead of housing scarcity. So what we have instead is a highly constrained market with these two extremes, and that leads to a lack of choice. And as you notice, I'm going to start using the slides very quickly. I almost use them like one of those flip books when you're a kid. So you'll want to be looking, or some of the principles won't make sense to you. So we have a lack of choice, and we're going to discuss different categories for why. Now, I have set this up. I hope it works. Nicole, if she's here, will be happy with me because she kept encouraging me to do this. But if anyone wants to take out their phone and scan the QR code, and you should be able to take that and answer the question. Now, to be clear, when you answer the question, don't answer for yourself. Many of us are professionals in the room. I'll pull up another document in a second, and we'll get back into the PowerPoint in a minute. Let's see. So, but answer for what you think the average person would answer, and then I will work on getting this web page onto that screen, if I can. Okay.
So basically we're answering not as planners, but as residents of our cities.
Yes, how you believe that the average resident would act. And I'm afraid to make that bigger, so hopefully I'll just read the question for you. In what ways or categories would you say that the average person would state the housing market has a lack of choice? And as you populate it, as you hit submit, I'm hoping it will populate. And if not, I'll just have some people shout out their thoughts. And we'll try to do this. I'll give you maybe 30 seconds or so to do this, and then we'll keep moving on. So we've got expensive, okay? So that leads to a lack of choice. Price, same as expensive, good. Available, size, okay? That's great. That ties with our data. Mansions, tiny, rural. Let's see, there's a lot going on here. Mansions, interest rates, okay, good point. Overpriced. So what our largest ones come down to price, size, and location. And then expensive, which is similar to price. So, okay, this is really interesting. So it's not updating the number of participants, but I think we've got a pretty good gauge on that. So we're going to keep going, and we'll go back into the PowerPoint mode. Okay, so we saw price, expensive. Those are the main ones that I'm remembering. Location was one. So I didn't remember seeing amount of available units, but this is one main answer that I've gotten in the past, and then housing unit type. This is different than the first, which is dealing with our overall quantity, but this is more the range of the different types that we have is something that's come up before as well. So thank you for your responses. Today what we're going to do is when we focus on these things, and I get these sort of responses, what I feel like we've done is missed the forest for the trees. And today my goal is to show you the forest, or to use another metaphor, to show you the dam that's blocking the cascade of housing abundance that can come in missing middle housing. We're going to talk about what the dam is. The missing middle is the water behind that dam that we're hopefully going to unblock, okay? And that housing range, the type is more commonly expressed as missing middle housing, right? And that's why it's missing. So again, we've got the two extremes, and what we need to do is add the missing middle, and we're not able to add the missing middle when we have an artificial shortage of housing. What we do is we drive costs up. And that's true whether we don't have enough total housing, which is, again, that overall supply, or we just limit one kind of housing. And I would add the word two even, because that's almost where we're at with our single-family homes. So when you do that, you create artificial constraints. And that creates missing middle housing. And that's why it exists on paper and not so much in the real world in quantity or at scale. Okay? We have some of it. We see historical precedents, but we don't build it as a matter of right, as our standard way of building today, and yet we used to. So if we're not getting it, we need to ask ourselves, why is it? Why is it actually missing in the first place? How are we creating this locked market or this dam that's holding the missing middle housing behind it? So these are the forest issues. We're going to talk primarily today about development type for the first half of the presentation, but what it is, again, is leading to preventing the housing type. And every time we create a constriction on our development type, it leads to downstream restrictions, and that's why we have this missing housing type. So our housing prices are going to go up when it looks like this. Missing middle housing is vacant, and what we need to do to create it is create walkable communities. The reason why is walkable communities allow the mass creation of missing middle housing by right without a rezone. Okay? You set a certain category or range of housing types that are permitted in a zone instead of a single-use zone like single-family zoning. You pre-measure for compatibility among these housing types, and you set certain rules so that they're what I call design-dependent compatibility. So let's talk about our two development types. The first we have, that's our standard for today, is drivable development, and the second that we have is walkable development. This has essentially been made illegal in today's environment, and what is really interesting, I'm going to share a fact because it's so important. We tend to associate a single-family home and even the suburbs with the American dream, and we tend to think that planning is something we've done from the bottom up in a lot of ways in our country. But I want to share with you a little anecdote from the book Escaping the Housing Trap that's going to, I think, change your perspective on this. In that book, he documents that the Federal Housing Administration set certain rules in the 1960s. What those rules said were, in order to get a loan guarantee on your property, you had to have a detached single-family home that had certain setbacks from other structures on different lots. And when that was set in the 1960s, in order to get those loans, in order to get the mortgage guarantee, or in order to get a loan, you had to get the mortgage guarantee, and you had to get the mortgage guarantee in order to own property for the average person in America. So what city councils did across the country is they raced to pass single-family zoning, exclusive single-family zones with these setbacks that match the FHA standards, because their residents showed up and said, you can't restrict us from owning property, and we have to meet these rules in order to own property, right? That's quite the incentive for them to adopt that zoning. But the main point is this was not an organic, from the bottom up, city council-led movement, but we've come to associate it very heavily with our identity, and yet it caused us to take a detour from a type of development that we've done for thousands of years, and is an organic pattern that's been the precedent for all over the world. Wherever you go, essentially, is the organic level or type of development. And so what we've done, though, today is we've locked it because of that zoning. We've made it inaccessible to us. And so what we need to do is unlock it. And what that will do is create a much broader range of housing, both development types and ultimately, because you can see, you've got basically two types of buildings here. You've got these large pods that are either commercial or apartment, and then you've got your single-family zone suburbs. Whereas here we've got a variety of lot sizes that sort of taper in size and get smaller as you get to the core, and then they move to what's called block scale buildings, of which you have much more flexibility of the uses on all of these lot sizes, as well as overall quantity. And so what walkable development does is it enables a large supply of missing middle housing. So how do we create more walkable development? Well, we need to understand the framework in which walkable development is based on. And it comes to us from a planning concept known as the transect from ecology that shows a set of subzones within each ecosystem where you have certain species and plant communities that cooperate together and that coexist together, but they don't cover all of they don't go any randomly in the area. What they are is their harmonious coexistence in each of these subzones. So you're not going to have one of these alpine trees down growing in the ocean, right? But you might have some shrubs up here and some larger shrubs up here until you move to those, and then you might have some grasses down here as you near the beach, and then some seaweed and other things here. And so they all work together as a team, and they're harmonious as they transition to gradually transition in a way that works for the different species. And what that framework did was it was translated into what's called the transect of the human habitat. Here we have our extreme right here that we talked about, and our other extreme in these two zones. But this right here is that missing middle housing. And that was translated into this transect of the human habitat. And it delivers missing middle housing. So what's the policy tool that we use to deliver walkable communities? Policy tool that we've made, roughly speaking, illegal is what I refer to as walkable community codes. Walkable community codes are my term for form-based codes, but there's a little bit of nuance there. Walkable community codes they address a much larger area than many form-based codes, which are what are called maybe a main street code or a corridor code. And these walkable community codes, the intent of them is to deliver a complete community from a neighborhood center or a town center all the way to a suburban or rural edge in a way that transitions harmoniously with a mix of housing and other building types as you feather out from that center. And the main thing about walkable community codes, in order to, we talk a lot about density. What we should be talking more about is character, actually. And one of the trades that we should make for allowing density is to deliver character. And walkable community codes are doing their job when they deliver character. Because everything that we do, we want it to be beautiful. We want it to deliver a delightful experience for people that reside there. And as we do, I think we can see easing of tensions in like NIMBY impulses. So there have been 364 form-based codes that have been adopted, less than 2% of communities, but there's a 60% adoption rate. So that's really important. That's actually a really high adoption rate. If you've been through a public hearing or two, you're going to know what it feels like to try and get a new code amendment passed. So this is actually really high. And this is a development type that is something that all of us know about and have seen. We've been there. In the presentation yesterday, someone mentioned we all love these places. We know them by heart, and because we go to vacation at them in Europe, right? Or we see something similar to them in Disneyland, right? These are places that we know and love and that we've been very used to for thousands, hundreds of generations, right? And so I'm going to show you the look and feel of these. This is Branson, Missouri. Again, I'm showing you these scale of buildings because we're not talking necessarily about these massive downtowns. These are walkable scaled, human scale communities. These are some more. This is Cheyenne, Wyoming. This is Ogden, Utah. This is here in Logan. This is also in Ogden. And again, this is another photo from Cheyenne, right? And we'll talk about the rules that make these buildings look the same. This is just a rendering for some live works. We've got multiple uses in the same building. This is actually a duplex. It's called a stacked duplex. These can possibly be what's called a shop house or a commercial and residential in the same building. This could be a mansion home apartment with multiple units. These are some more mansion home apartments, and these are some townhomes also in Ogden. So walkable communities create complete communities. Why is this important? Well, I came across this quote I love from Gandhi that he said, 7 dangers to human virtue: wealth without work, pleasure without knowledge, knowledge without character, business without ethics, science without humanity, religion without sacrifice, and politics without principle. As I was pondering these, one thing that I came across was the idea of separation, right? When we separate reward from work and just the principle of separation in general, we lose something. Something goes away. And so complete communities and walkable communities bring things back together. And what I think is important as planners is that we understand that they unify and align interests. And I think this is one of our key tasks as planners, is we need to unify and align interests. So these are the characteristics of walkable communities. Again, the complete unit of development is not a home or a building, it's an entire community. And they're orchestrated to do that. They address the issue of neighborhood character, they amenitize simple street design and landscape, they have a connected or grid-based street network, they have maximum block sizes, they have a mix of uses by right without a rezone. They also have multiple housing types and they're permitted naturally in those zones, and then those are predetermined to be compatible. Street design and landscape are part of the standards, and then open space is also required to be in proximity to homes and town centers at a regular interval. So To clarify, one thing that form-based codes are not is architectural standards. And the reason why is you can have your zoning that just creates one big building on a block and then say this is what the architecture needs to look like, the facade. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is something that creates this. So they've taken that same block, and on that block we've got 3 or 4 or 5 different building types. We've got some medium-sized houses here, some smaller there that are attached. These are detached, and then some even smaller homes here. We've got some potential ADUs or accessory buildings back here. We've got an apartment building here and some Main Street type live works or retail shop all on the same block. And that's what form-based codes can do for you if you follow certain rules. Again, they create a complete community. They're organized around a center. You can see this is one of the first of them. It's called Seaside. And the way that you make sure that they're actually walkable is you have something called a pedestrian shed. The pedestrian shed is based around the idea of that most people will walk about 5 to 10 minutes to get what they need on average. And so what that translates to is a quarter mile, maybe a half mile. And so that's 1,320 feet for a quarter mile. And so you want about 70% of the buildings or structures at minimum within that quarter mile range. And that's actually how you start your plan, is within that quarter mile. And you can see the town center is at the center, and you can see that by the structure of these buildings. They're more intense, and then you have, of course, the open space at the center and some other ones nearby. So again, we have street standards, lot sizes and types, building setbacks, and then building and architectural design standards. Often those are added in afterward. That's actually a good thing because it means you can use the same code over and over and get different architectural styles if you pair them correctly with those design standards. What also helps make them walkable is that you have additional choice because you have maximum block sizes. As opposed to here, you could walk maybe a mile and a half. If you live here and you want to get there and there's a fence there, you've got to walk maybe a mile and a half to go here, and so it's not feasibly walkable, right? What that does is when we have a maximum block size and a grid-based street network is you've got about 100 ways to get from, say, here to there, right? You can go here, you can go here, multiple opportunities. So again, we have streetscape requirements and then standards for the front yard and the individual house. These are some more photos. This is 9th and 9th in Salt Lake, and then this is Daybreak in South Jordan. These are another nighttime shot of Daybreak, and then this is 9th and 9th in Salt Lake again. These are some townhomes in Ogden. This is kind of, we talked a larger scale for walkable communities. What this does is, this is the micro scale of how you achieve that on a lot by lot and building by building basis. The core thing that you need to remember here is the location of the parking in relationship to the building and the relationship of the building to the street. What that means is the parking is almost always in the back. The building is almost always next to the sidewalk and the street with street trees, as you can see here. But you don't see garages or parking areas between the building and the street. And it seems like a simple rule, but it's kind of the nuts and bolts of walkable communities, and it applies whether you're talking about a small single-family home or a 3-story building, right? It's one of the fundamental rules. You can break it maybe 15% of the time, but you have to be really careful and thoughtful about when you do. And again, they allow this mix of housing types on a neighborhood scale. So right here we've got some townhomes, again some ADUs, some mansion homes right here. These could be, if they were built correctly, apartments or single-family homes. And then we've got some medium-sized homes right here, all on the same block. And so this is not just a diagram you saw earlier. This is actually been built for, about 40 years now almost. So that's kind of when walkable communities started to be resurrected. These are some cottage court apartments. These are in Ogden, and there's about 10 units there, I think. This is an ADU that's in use right now, and then this is a single-family home on that same lot. And there you'll see that notice that this faces the street here, and so that does there as well. So let's see. We've got, again, missing middle housing types are baked into these codes, and so they deliver them by right at scale once you adopt these sort of codes and you follow the certain rules that permit them. These are some images of streetscape standards. And so what you're trying to do is create this walkable community for people that the environment that they're spending their time while they're walking is as pleasing as possible. I would tell you, again, one of these simple rules that you want to follow if you're looking at a walkable community code is that street trees are like the connective tissue of a walkable community in terms of making it delightful and enjoyable to walk in and exist in. If you make a mistake, put a tree somewhere near it, and you'll take care of it like 80% of the time. Okay, so then on open space, the open space, this is interesting. It doesn't have to be big, and it comes in different types. There's more urban hardscape character, and there's more softscape, more in the general urban areas, and then more hardscape in the more downtown or areas. So again, missing middle housing occurs best in walkable communities. Now, one final point or two about walkable communities. They're customized to the planning environment and precedent that they are adopted in. They all start with a design. That's really important. You need to have someone produce a design, and from that design, you then code it and draw these sub-districts with the different mixes of building types and work from there so that you know that they're all predetermined to be compatible. And I have a copy of a code that actually is designed. It's not just a code, it's a toolkit of codes to replicate codes that are customized to our planning environment here in Utah, which the main planning precedent that we deal with in the Intermountain West is known as the Plat of Zion. There were about 750 communities that were based on that. The majority of those have been successful. And this is a code that was developed. It's a toolkit to create codes to apply it to your environment, your unique city, town, or area. And let me tell you about this code. It was developed about 12 years ago. It's probably the best form-based code that I've ever seen, and it's actually not been adopted anywhere. I had the opportunity to work for an employer, and then I got it from the city that it was considered in, and it was developed to create these large-scale communities and to replicate them over and over. It was designed by a planner named Andreas Duani. Many of you planners will recognize that name. He works for, he's a principal of a world-renowned planning firm known as Duani Platter Zyberk & Co. And they came here in Utah and did this code, and I've been fortunate to get a copy of it. And what he said about the Plat of Zion, we used to get made fun of about our block sizes, our 660 by 660, but he kind of reversed and flipped the table on that. What he said about the Plat of Zion and all the things that you can do with it, this outer edge is 660 by 660, he said, you have a Lamborghini in the garage and you haven't even taken it out for a spin. And I'm happy to provide a copy of that code and to share details about how to use it if anyone's interested. And this was, again, a world-renowned planner that stated this. These are different ways to subdivide that 660 by 660 block. They go from everything from rural to suburban to agrarian to some more suburban, and then to more of a missing middle, general urban, and then even like downtown centers. And they're all designed to create delightful environments. So this leads to the creation of missing middle housing types en masse, these walkable community codes. And I'm happy to share that with any of you. I'll give you a PDF copy. Come talk to me. We'll chat about it afterwards. So, okay, we've talked about walkable communities. This is the second half of the presentation. What we're going to talk about now is this question mark missing type of choice. So this is just for you as planners, not the average person, but anyone who's a planner or anyone in the room, feel free to answer this question. We've talked about development type and housing type being things that are missing, and as well as financial is one of the main things that you all mentioned. What would you say is another category of lack of choice that exists in our housing type? And feel free to spitball, and there's no wrong answers. You're not going to hurt my feelings, so go ahead and share it. Anything you'd like.
Well, I think
Briefly, please.
here in Cache Valley, mixed-use development is pretty missing.
Okay, mixed-use development. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other thoughts? Go for it. Starter homes? Okay, great. Any other thoughts? We'll take one more. Sorry, was there? What's that? Transitional housing. Can you define that for me? Okay, so life cycle housing. We use different terms, but great point. Okay, here's what I think it is that we're overlooking. One of these issues that's a forest issue. It's about ownership, okay? So we talked about housing type, development type, and what we're going to talk about a little bit more, go back to the background data, is that millennial suburbanization was more pronounced in the metros, have better housing affordability, and lower share of larger homes in their central neighborhoods. So if they could stay in the central urban neighborhoods, they would. That's what we're really taking from this, okay? But if they moved, it was because it was more affordable in the suburbs, and they but selectively to those with neighborhood amenities and larger number of bedrooms. So in all of the data we've talked about so far, they used basically the term, where do millennials want to live? But when you start to see a change in the reports and the summaries of those reports, the data, what it starts to talk about is where they want to own. So we've talked about two extremes. Again, where they wanted to live, but when they decided to buy, they moved the suburbs. So the way I kind of bring this home is that the millennials, they dated the urban areas. They dated them long. They dated them good. It was a great time. But when they decided to marry and settle down, they married the suburbs, okay, in large part. And that's kind of what's happened. But they did so to attain ownership, to right-size their home, and to move to get those amenities for those areas. So we've told ourselves that the American dream is about single-family home, but really it used to be about ownership. It's more fundamental than the building type that ownership occurred in. So this missing type that we're not talking about is ownership type, and that's what we're really here to talk about today. This is the really new material. This is actually more true than it seems. It might seem like simplistic, but it's actually pretty true, and we'll show you data. I can rent an apartment or I can own a single-family home. That's factually pretty documented, okay? And what we have to understand that with every building that we live in, there's an ownership type. We either have occupant ownership or off-site ownership with rentership in that building. Or we have occupant ownership where the person who owns the property lives there, right? So what that means is this is our ownership opportunity supply. We're going to turn this into a grid, but remember, this is about the supply of opportunity to own, okay? And we are going to have different building types in this. And so we've got our grid, and this grid falls within a larger grid, which is our development types, which we've already covered, but you need to keep in mind that we're constricting a lot of this already, so you can imagine what I'm going to say gets even better if we address that. So we've got, we can own a single-family home or rent an apartment. What that means is that we're leaving this open and not able to be fully utilized. What we want to avoid for most people is to have people moving into here where this drifts over to the left. So on the right is the ownership, on the left is the rentership. And what we're getting today in our market, we have markets that are moving to 21, 25% owned by corporate landlords, even in single-family homes, which means they're moving into rentership. They're losing the opportunity to own property. That's not good, okay? So what we need to do in order to create more ownership-type supply is focus on overlooked ownership opportunities. And what we've done, because we talked about walkable communities, those are, functionally speaking, they're not legal, okay? We need to change that. But in this case, most of these opportunities are actually legal, but they're overlooked. And because they're overlooked, they might as well be missing to us and locked in the same way. So that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of our presentation, is how to unlock those and move multifamily properties into occupant ownership. What's important to understand is that this is not just single-family homes, not just this type of building, it's all multifamily types. And if we can open this up, hopefully we can actually move some of the single-family homes back into ownership as well. Why this matters, and Steve Waldrop talked a little bit about this in his presentation, is when you lose ownership where someone occupies that building, you create an externality. You get a person who thinks differently. When you become a corporation that owns the property and doesn't live there, they don't have to face a social incentive or social friction to be a good neighbor, okay? At the same time, you get a renter who doesn't have financial skin in the game, who wants to make that property something that they're good because they have to see their neighborhood at the corner store or at church or at the pub or wherever else in their neighborhood, right? And so you get this schism and this splitting that leads to this separation that we talked about, right? So Gandhi actually missed one, which was occupancy without ownership, right? So I'm happy to fill in that blank for him there. Okay, and this is an example of that. What we have here is, just one second. What we have here is an example from 2023. This is from Fox 13 News. They had a couple was paying $1,600 a month rent. They had a $40 common area fee. They had $50 to have a cat, $100 for a garage. These are all in addition to this. $65 mandatory internet. You can't opt out of it. $650 service fee. They don't know what it's for. $34 charge for sewer, $35 for water, $18 for trash, And what's also interesting about this is that in the article it mentioned that this common area had mold growing in it. So they're paying $40 a month for that common area, right? And this is the result of externalities. When we separate these interests, so that we're purely financial and separating financial from social, we get externalities, right? And what's interesting about a number of these fees is they didn't get a choice. This other person down here in the second example, they said that they have no control over their gas, but they're paying $170 for it a month. And so their corporate ownership, they're more likely to foreclose on you. They're more likely to raise the rent. And this is documented in that article. Again, Atlanta and Jacksonville, Florida are at 25% and 21% of the market that's corporate ownership. And so we have to figure out how to maintain occupant ownership in our state in order to preserve the American dream. We don't want to go in that direction. So again, I can own a single family home or I can rent an apartment. But what if I can own an apartment? Now this is where you might have the irresistible urge to just scream out, man, this guy's an idiot. Haven't you heard of condos? We're going to talk about a whole range of ownership opportunities beyond condos. And we will talk about them a little bit and why they have some challenges. But again, this apartment building that we've been looking at all these graphs isn't just representative of that type of building itself. It's representative of all miscommunal housing because that's where it becomes a little bit different and it takes a little bit more creativity to own these types of properties. But it can be done. It's legal. So here's the data I promised that will back up that show you basically own a single-family home or rent an apartment. This is all housing units that got permits. This is from the red one is one that we want to look in each category. That's the most important. It's 2010 and forward. And so all units in 2010 and forward, 66% of them, of housing stock that was permitted were occupant ownership. The single family was at 90. Single family, and the subcategories of single family are single family detached and single family attached. The detached are 95%. The attached are 69%. But then look, there's this precipitous drop right here, okay? And this is when you move 2 to 4 units buildings, 5 to 19 unit buildings, and 20 plus unit buildings, right? So what that's really telling us is that, again, blue is for ownership, red is for rentership, okay? What we're saying is that 34% of the market is available available to be owned that's being left on the table as an option for ownership, okay? So in the single-family attached, which is basically townhomes, what that's telling us, even 31% are available for ownership if we can learn to do things differently. 79% of the 2 to 4, 89% of 5 to 19, and 97% of 20-plus unit buildings are rentals and not owner-occupied. And what's interesting is you see that the single ownership rate is going up in single-family detached, and it's going down in all other categories since the year 2000, right? So that the situation is getting worse. We're getting less ownership in those years. And what that means is that pulling from these last slides, the graph, all this empty white space here and here are overlooked ownership opportunities, and we need to create the opportunity for them in this grid right here for all of our missing middle housing types, not as well as this one, but more than that, that one just as well. So again, this is the 2000 data, or 2010 forward. Just show you it's even a little bit more severe. It's almost exclusively rental. And again, overlooked ownership opportunities. What this says, I don't have full confidence in this data because I've looked at it 2 or 3 times and there's something a little wonky with it. But what it's telling us is that the price of condos has gone up dramatically in Utah, and it's the same graphs roughly are on all the states in the last 25 years. This is actually telling us that they're 22.5% more expensive than single-family homes. I don't trust that data, but I just want to put you out there in case I can get you more data or you want more. It's from the Community Associations Institute on their website. Again, what if I can own an apartment instead of what is important about this is if I can own an apartment, I no longer have to make a choice. We talked about all the millennials' preferences, right? They want to live in urban areas, but they had to move to the suburbs to own properties. What if you don't have to make a choice between your preferred lifestyle and your ability to earn equity? That's the false choice that I think they had to make, right? And I think that's a problem. I think it's a real problem because we should be able, think about if you were to look downtown Logan, right? There's 5-story buildings, I think blocked off, maybe it's 4. If everyone in that building owned their property, and then think about what it's like at dinner time when they come down, the sense of stewardship that they have over that area, because they're a stakeholder in that community financially, right? And if we can reverse that trend and make that something that's common, that's something we can do. I want to point out, Scott Perks is here. Their new general plan deals with this issue specifically. I think it's really impressive, and it's something that I would encourage all of you to look at, of addressing multifamily ownership. How do we start to crack that problem? They've stated that as a goal in their general plan. And again, it's not just ownership, it's multifamily ownership, right? Where you've got more than one unit in a building. And so they want owner occupants in their, it's North Logan. Did I say North Ogden? It's North Logan. Okay. Sorry, I worked for North Ogden for 7 years, so I was so worried I was going to say that. Because anything that starts with North is Ogden to me. So, but yeah, it's North Logan. So Scott, you can slap me afterwards if you need to. So, again, this addresses all missing middle housing types, the ones that we're going to talk about. What I want you to start to think about is the idea that overlooked ownership opportunities are the missing middle of ownership types. Okay, they're missing middle. They're available to us, but we're not utilizing them in the way that we could. And they create an ownership type that encourages the same incentives as the walkable communities and the missing middle housing that they're designed for. They're community focused, community oriented. Okay. And so how do we unlock these ownership opportunities? Well, we get rid of this bad partnership between ownership and a detached single-family home. We also resolve objection. The reason why we do that, I sat in so many public hearings, and 3 or 4 issues, major issues as the city considered the issue of detached ADUs, short-term rentals, and then I think internal ADUs, and there was one other factor. But what it always came back to is they wanted occupant ownership on the property, right? And so it's easy to beat up on NIMBYs, but I think we need to be more understanding than that, and we need to take time to listen to what their valid concerns are. I believe that we can strike at the heart of their concerns by addressing the issue of ownership. I think that's reflected in the North Logan plan, and it's a valid concern, and we need to think about how to do that, and that's what we're here to do. So I'm going to start giving some solutions. I'm going to skip past these for the sake of time, but what we need to do, these ones I'll go through. For the sake of time, we need to bring together walkable neighborhoods, multifamily building types, and occupant ownership. And where the sweet spot is where they all three overlap. The more they overlap, the more abundance cycle for housing we're going to get, because we're going to start to create a market choice between owning a single-family home and renting an apartment. Now I can own my apartment, right? And now I don't have to make that false choice between where I want to live and where I need to build equity. Okay, so we need to unlock walkable communities, and when we do that, they will create a cascade of missing middle housing because they're permitted by right in there. And then we need to make sure that those are able to be owned, and that's what we're going to talk about now. But these missing ownership opportunities are leading, in my opinion, to missing middle housing and missing walkable communities. So this is our first ownership type. The first is shared equity opera ownership. It's actually a standard way to do things. This is an article from The Secret Life of Mom. A mom said, I bought a house with another single mom to share costs and maintenance. Now we have a kid paradise with a built-in babysitting, care sharing, car sharing, and a craft studio. It was 2 single mothers. They'd both gotten divorced. They got together and started talking. They realized, you know what, we have similar values. We can't afford to live a suburban lifestyle right now, but we can team up and buy a house together, and we can operate in a way that works for both of us. And so what they did, the way you do this is called tenancy in common, and it's you each own a percentage of the building. You can also pair that with something called an operating agreement, and that sets the rules and terms for the ownership. So if there's concerns, you can, who's going to be responsible for this, who owns what percentage, what the regular weekly tasks are even for the house, or maintenance responsibilities, et cetera. Why this is so important is because we have 28% of people that are living alone, 7% are single families, 20% are sharing with other adults, and 25% are couples. So our family structure has changed dramatically in the last 20 to 30 years. This provides an opportunity for them to own property and to do so in a really simple way. This is available, as far as I'm aware, in all states, right? You just have to know how to do it. What's really interesting, in 2021, the state passed a law that said in 75% of your city area, you need to allow internal ADUs. Then in 2024, they passed a law that said you can't discriminate against people who have fractional ownership of single-family homes. If you take those two laws together, what I believe that actually says is that each internal dwelling unit that you have in your city is required to be able to actually be part of a duplex, because you can't discriminate against multi-property owners. So if you own the property, if you live in the ADU, you could approach the owner and say, I'd like to own part of the building, and if you pair those laws together. Now, I'm not an attorney. I'd love to talk to one about that, but it's pretty simple language. And so I think they actually legalize duplex without anyone realizing it. And so if you have concerns with that, what we need to think about is looking at your definition of housekeeping unit and your family size limit, things like that. So another way you can do this is through a deed of trust note if you're to sell part of the property or buy back part of the property, or in something else called a contract in play. Okay, this is one of the big things. We need to get to all the way to master development agreements. That's the most important thing because it's going to tie everything else together. So community land trust, what you do with community land trust is, and this is a perfect point to what Steve Waldrop said about the UDOT land and finding ways to be a steward of that land. And this is actually a perfect tool that we need to really look at. We also should look at this for the federal lands and SITLA lands within the state. The current administration, presidential administration, there's an article about a month ago said that they were open to having housing on the federal lands. And what I think is we need to not look at housing alone or even 35,000 starter homes. What we need to look at is putting those into walkable, complete communities. And so that they create this way to cooperate with people of different incomes and get along together well, and so that they're seeded throughout the community to not create need for excessive social services, et cetera, but to be harmonious with the neighborhood around them. So a community land trust, what you do with this is a corporation or a nonprofit buys the land, it owns the land under the house, but get a mortgage on the property. At the time you buy the property, you enter into an agreement with them that says you can resell the property at a certain point, and what that does for you is it means that you are not able to, you can only have a max capped sell price. So what that capped sales price, according to a formula, does is it makes it so that you cannot, you preserve affordability, right? So you think, well, that's a really expensive way to provide affordability, but it's really not, because people stay in these for about 7 years, and they sell at a predetermined price, and it preserves affordability for the next person so that the price is not excessive. The reason why they can do that is because it means that they are able to, it means that because the CLT owns the ground lease. And so they can set the terms for that. And it delivers perpetual affordability. What everyone gets out of this is a much lower default rate. The bank actually gets a more secure opportunity, where the failure rate in the Great Recession was 1.5% for these types of mortgages, but the average across the nation was 7%. So they had a much lower failure rate. The CLT loses the ability to perpetuate affordability, and the homeowner gives a maximum sales price, like it's capped when they sell. And so what you're creating is perpetual affordability. And what's important to remember, these are people that oftentimes, at least historically, wouldn't be able to afford a home otherwise, right? And so they're being given an opportunity to, I call this home ownership with training wheels. If there's financial troubles, the CLT can step in, and there's a payment to them, like $15 to $50 or so a month. And if that payment stops coming, they can just knock on the door and say, hey, we're noticing you're having a problem. How can we help? What's going on? What's important is, again, they own the ground, and what their interest is, they're a steward, and they care about a long-term interest, right? This is something that we can scale in many, many ways. There's hundreds of these across the country. They are used all throughout. We have about 5 in Utah, but they're not used nearly at the scale that they should. So everyone gets something. Banks get the lower foreclosure, CLT gets perpetual affordability, and the homeowner gets an opportunity to buy a home that they wouldn't otherwise get. And then they can move on and graduate to full-scale homeownership. The next one that we're going to talk about is, there's a couple of other things, this long-term interest on CLTs that's really important, is they don't just create affordability, they create the ability to create good housing stock over a long period of time. So in Aspen, there's 150 billionaires in that area, but there's 40% occupation of the, staffing at the hospital of the nurses, because the nurses can't afford to live there. And one of the reasons why is the housing stock is deteriorating, okay? Well, so they have a bunch of HOAs, but the HOAs haven't set aside enough in their reserve fund. What they're looking at doing is converting all of those to one single community land trust that has a long-term interest that stewards the care of the property, and they can do a better job of maintaining that. And they're 501c3s, so they're not profit-oriented. They're interested in the community good, the public interest, the community interest over a long time. So what they do is they balance long-term and short-term interests. Again, we have 5: Park City, Utah County, Washington County, Moab Community Trust, and the Utah County, I don't know if that one ever got going. Here's an example of one in Montana. This has 60 homes. Half of them are in a community land trust, and they sold at half the market rate because the land was taken out of the cost of the equation. Right? They're sold just for the value of the building, and what you do there is and you can't tell a difference between the regular market rate and the subsidized through a CLT. And these also have 5 or 6 units that are in condos. Condos actually have a disadvantage in this that we'll talk about in a little bit in that scenario. So again, this is the home. These are the homes. The community land trust property ones that were discounted sold at about in the 300s, mid 300s, and then the regular market rate were about 715. So they're very high, but you can't tell a difference between them. And so you're mixing these different incomes, and it balances things out a bit better. This is the master plan. This is the interiors. Let's see. Okay, the next one is building cooperatives. These are important. This is another form of fractional or percentage open ownership. It's not condos, but it's similar to condos. What you're doing here with building cooperatives, the difference between them and a condo is that they allow you to buy a share in a corporation, and with that share, you have the right to dwell in one of the to live in one of the dwelling units. Okay, what that does is it creates the same incentive that you have as a single-family homeowner. It's just in percentages, right? But now all of a sudden, with a condo, you may only care about your unit, particularly if it's a horizontal condo, and the quality of the walls surrounding it. But with this, you all own a percentage of the entire landscape, the entire building, right? So, as part of that corporation, right? And that helps tie in later. So there's great resources on this called mikasa/inc.org is right over here out of Washington, D.C. They have these in Washington, D.C., all across the East Coast, in San Francisco, and Tampa was exploring them, in Minnesota as well. So you can also do what's called a co-op conversion, where there's bills that are called Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. What you do there is when a landlord decides he wants to sell a building, the laws state that the tenants have 60 days to buy that land, or to offer to buy that land, or to express interest in it, right? And then the community development department steps in and helps them work to find financing for it, meet the terms, and meet all the requirements of it. But the tenants get together and say, we want to own this building and own our property that we live in, right? So you're converting from this offsite ownership and rentership scenario to occupant ownership, right? And so that's something we need to look at. Now, this is available in I believe in Minnesota as well, and also San Francisco. Now, I searched for building cooperatives here in Utah. I believe it is legal, but no one's doing it. If anyone knows, please come talk to me about a building co-op. But there is the same act that's being used, I believe, the same type of ownership for something very similar called a land co-op. And this is the Riverbed Ranch and OSR Land Co-op. This has been going since about 2019. There were 250 shares. The share price was $35,000. That was just for a share in the corporation to occupy a 2.4-acre lot approximately. And then it was about $230,000 in construction costs. Now, the point that the founder of this mentioned is that's still a lot cheaper than what you're paying for a single-family home. This is not a bunch of religious people, like religious group, splinter group, or something like that, or preppers. What they are just people who wanted to live in a self-reliant neighborhood. The real point that you need to take away about this is that cooperative ownership of land and property is possible within Utah. We need to look at exploring it so that we can provide competition to corporate landlords and off-site rentership. So let's see. This says that half of them were sold as of 2022. I checked the website a couple days ago, and it sounds like all of the lots have actually been sold. So again, they're available in all of these cities. What's really important to understand is that this is a very common way of ownership. We're just not familiar with it. In Zurich, Switzerland, they have about 5% of the buildings are actually in building cooperatives, and it's also gaining steam in Geneva, Switzerland. And then there's more information on the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy about these and how cities can partner with them. This is the Mikasa data. You can go to their website. and find more out about that. Let's see. A spin on this that's a little different is you can not only own them together, but you can design the floor plan together as a group and then construct it once you've got the basic stilts built. And they do this actually in Germany. And then this is what's really important. This is because this starts to leverage more than one tool at the same time. There's a cooperative land trust in Vermont that's called the Champlain Housing Trust, and they actually have the housing trust that owns the land, the building, or the community land trust that owns the land, and then a building cooperative on top of that that owns the structure. So it's not just single family fee simple ownership. They actually own, as a group, the building, right? And so what that provides is a backstop to be able to get it so that you can own, you can have this long-term interest with the community land trust in the multifamily property, right? And preserve affordability as well as other long-term interests. So these are some of the buildings that they use. They have 125 units about that are in the building cooperatives that are inside of a community land trust. And then this is to bring it home. This is Nibley. We're going to talk about condominiums. I'm aware of those. The challenge with condominiums is that you have to sell 50% of the units before you can issue your first C of O on them. That creates a real problem for developers because they lose appreciation by the time they get certificates of occupancy. They sell them a year or two or three earlier, and so it creates challenges for finances. The other thing about condos is really a federal tax issue is the main point, is that you can do something called a 1031 exchange, and you can also depreciate the interest, which is basically there's incentives to hold on to the buildings that you build because you can count it as a deduction from your income. And so that's one of the reasons why we need institutions that start to think about a long-term interest for private but shared ownership, like CLTs, right? They don't have financial incentives to build these. However, I wanted to see, I've seen these many times, but they sort of fit into the category of why you would get a condo built is that you'd get smaller buildings built here in Utah because of that tax structure issue, is that you're not going to have a huge lag between the time you sell half of the units on 2 or 3 stories versus a 20-story condo building, right? That's going to be a lot bigger ask of someone. So you're probably going to see smaller ones of these. There's also some in Logan that someone told me about this morning. And so that followed my hunch that you'd see smaller condos still happening from time to time here in Utah. So this is what's called a subordinate SFR ownership. It's conversion of an ADU to actual separate property ownership. This is in Farmington. They did this. Is Dave here? They have 10,000 square foot lot minimum, and there's 2 ways to do it. You can have to subdivide it into 2 lots. You can have a 2,500 or 2,900 square foot lot here, or you can just meet the building code. But they both have to meet standards for a certain minimum lot size. But you're subdividing property in a unique way to be able to lower that barrier to entry for ownership. So what's interesting is this is a precedent that's happened for thousands of years, hundreds of years in our country, but in England and others probably thousands. So what we really start talking about is subdivision of lots, and this is much more easy to do in a walkable community where you're basically creating a minor street. And so this is what it could look like, creating this secondary subdivision at what used to be the rear property lines of things. So this is what it would look like if you take that and you turn it into smaller units that were ADUs but could become townhomes or something like that. This ties back into that Duane Platter-Zybert code that was prepared to create complete communities calibrated to your area based on that Plat of Zion. These are, again, those possibilities of how to do that, and this is all of these interblock networks are what can do that. So that's another ownership opportunity. What I want to get to is, so we've got live work units and shop houses, and what I want to get to is there's occupant owner investor splits, which is where you partner with a corporation if you can't afford the full house, and you split the equity when you sell, the appreciated equity. The next step that our opportunity is rent to own. This is done by Crown Homes in southern Utah. You rent for 15 years with a lease, and then you can buy it at 65% of the sales price after 15 years. And over time, your rent goes up to prepare you for that so you don't have sticker shock when you purchase the home. Again, I think that we need to look at 7 to 15 or maybe 20 walkable communities instead of 35,000 starter homes, and we can deposit those 35,000 starter homes in a harmonious way inside those communities here in the state, and I think that could partner very well with the governor's goals that he's stated. This is where we can tie all of them together. That I think is possible. I've talked to a couple of attorneys about this. I'm not an attorney, but I've tried to do as much research as I can because I believe this is possible. Master development agreements, I've kind of have a catchphrase here. It's one ownership opportunity to multiply all other ownership opportunities. So, like, for example, what you can do is you have a walkable community design as part of your master development agreement, missing middle housing types that are approved as part of that walkable community design, architectural design standards. This is where it gets really creative. Is if you had a 1,000-acre community, and instead of requiring a certain percentage of open space, you required a certain percentage of those lots to be sold, donated, or sold at a discount rate to a community land trust or deposited into a community land trust, you've then created, in exchange for an increase in density, you've then created a perpetual affordability opportunity for people to be able to sell that home at a buy the home, then sell it at a mediated price, and you can do that 7 to 10 times over and over. And then you can also do a community land trust that owns a building cooperative where you own a 3 or 4 story building with 20 units, but the land costs are still taken out of it because you've got the community land trust that owns the land and isn't charging to you for the cost of the land all the time. And then you can still do any other regular ownership opportunities, such as just a regular building cooperative, secondary subdivision, or shared equity partnership with another, like a single parent, stuff like that. And so what you have is, if you remember that transect diagram, what we have is a transect or a harmonious set of categories of ownership opportunities, of ADU ownership, shared equity, building cooperatives, condominium ownership, and development agreements. And then you can use this development agreement to tie all of the rest together. And we have precedent pretty close to that in JDC Ranch. They did it through a homeowners association and deed restrictions, but I think you can use these same tools as shown by the Champlain Housing Trust in Vermont that we talked about earlier. So we have scales of ownership opportunities. When we tie them all together, you start to multiply the ownership opportunities, right? And we can create a housing abundance cycle. We need to transition the idea of property ownership from single-family homes to make it standard to own multifamily homes and create an affordability cascade as a result of doing so. And by doing that, I believe that we can unlock walkable development and missing middle housing. And again, I'll close with one of my favorite quotes: "Imagination is more important than knowledge." And I'm trying to expand our imagination of what's possible. I've done as much. This is not communism. This is not socialism. What it is the group shared ownership and exercise of private property rights, and that's very different. But we're at a point, I believe, where we need to move from looking out just from our own interests, but looking out for our interests and our neighbors' interests together at the same time. And if we can do that, we can transition to create this cascade of ownership opportunities. So, wow, that was kind of a lot, right? I am happy to entertain any questions, and I'd love to hear them from you at this time. Go ahead. Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Two questions, actually. One is, where do the land trusts, where are they getting their money, and what happens after the 99 years?
Great question. The first answer is that they're renewable for 99 years. The limit is different in different states. Like in Montana, it's actually 75. And then where are they getting their money? It's usually provided either by government subsidy or private donation. What I think is really important about, and I wish Laura was here, is that these federal lands and SITLA lands, you wouldn't even have to buy, and the state-held properties, you wouldn't even have to buy the property in that case, right? It's already owned by the state. So those are especially valuable ownership opportunities that we really need to be considering. But it does come from some form of either public subsidy or private subsidy. But what's important about that is that it is done at a repeatable scale. It's perpetual through as many cells of homes, for multiple families. So in 99 years or more, you could have 20 families that occupy that home, right? And they all transition from rentership to this mediated home ownership to full ownership. So thanks for the question. You bet. Other questions? Tim, go for it.
Question reminds me of, I think it was Francis Lilly in the opening session mentioned government ownership potentially of looking to own land, and your ideas sort of broaden possibilities of exploring options. So thank you for all the you've shared.
Yeah.
I just want to make an observation and maybe just put something out there that a lot of the designs you've shared, implicit in them or inherent in them is the back alley. I think you
Okay.
called it a secondary street.
Yeah.
You know, to maintain a walkable street, the garages are in the back for townhomes, small, narrow lot, single-family homes, other housing types that you mentioned. And I'm not sure, but it seems that some communities might recognize those as public secondary streets or alleys, whereas others might say, that's on you, developer, those are private alleys, private streets. And in the case where they are private streets or private alleys, they are expensive to that community, to the homeowners to maintain, replace over time. And yet, study after study shows that the value of tax revenues per acre with a more compact form or more housing units, even if they're less per unit, is going to be greater. So it's interesting that maybe inadvertently a public works policy that we're only going to maintain and own publicly a standard street, you know, a standard
Yeah.
local street is all that we're going to inherit. As the city is another form perhaps of a subsidy for development types that might front load off of those.
That are
So I
drivable.
guess I just want to raise the thought and the discussion in our respective communities as to when and why should there be public versus private secondary streets, alleys, to perhaps be an incentive for this type of walkable development you're sharing.
When should there be secondary taking ownership of those?
Well,
secondary streets?
city accepting a private street
Oh, yeah.
and a private alley,
Yeah.
that the private becomes public so that it's not an ongoing cost and liability.
I would, that's a great question. I would focus on the quality of the construction of the road and not the width. And also the accessibility of the utilities. I think that could free things up. One of the critiques from a walkable community perspective of street standards that cities often implement is that they are so wide that they gold plate, and they increase the barrier to entry of development, and that affects housing affordability, right? So I am in favor of going for the quality of the road as opposed to, and the durability of it rather than the width of it, and we want to do both. And I think that making that shift could free things up. You know, I think that another thing is that we could, well, I have this idea, I don't know if this ties in, but there's, you know, something called PIDs in the state. I believe that you could use PIDs, tie an incentive for PIDs to home ownership, and that could be a way to make them cheaper for the construction of them for a developer. That doesn't exactly answer your question, but it's something that I think we need to explore to make them cheaper to implement. But another way to look at that issue in particular is that if you subdivide these, they could actually make the property at the front more affordable because, again, 12% of sales are not, only 12% are affordable to most people, right? So how can you relieve some of that cost burden for the property owner who wants to buy the front one? You can say, well, you can now subdivide it and recoup some of the cost of that property and put it against your mortgage and pay down some of the mortgage. So that's another issue. So
Thanks. I'll give the mic up to someone else. I'll just say more succinctly, reduced HOA fees if they're public alleys.
oh, great point. Thanks. Okay, we have a question back here.
You had mentioned at the beginning that the single-family structure was kind of tied to FHA loan approval, where you could get in for low money down and reasonable interest rates, and created a finance position for affordable housing. That's why it did that. And it seems like we need to address that finance ability first, because that's what directed us towards
Yes.
structure. And if you don't have an ability for the average person to go in and finance a home in a typical way, then we're not putting finance first. It shouldn't have to be the driver.
That's a great point. If you want a lot of detail on that, read a book called Escaping the Housing Trap. You want a whole different perspective on how to address our housing affordability issues and what caused them. That book is really worth your time. I think you'd really enjoy it, frankly. Yeah, in the latter part, there is to a lot of them, but you can highlight all the changes that they made in mortgages from the 1940s and 30s to now, and then what you do is just step by step reverse them. We've done it somewhat, but for the most part not. So the restriction that happened in the 60s is not now in place, but the damage was done by the time it got changed. We moved completely to detached monoculture of single-family homes because of that. And so generations of Utahns and Americans, and now it's all they know, right? We're afraid of people, oftentimes in a different socioeconomic income, just because we don't interact with them on a daily basis. And we can create a nightmare that's not realistic in our head of what it might be like to live with them. Yes. Financing is actually probably, I didn't have time to address that in this, but it's probably the massive other factor in housing affordability. One of the questions he asks in that book is housing investment or is it shelter? We've essentially made the decision that's an investment. And that is what is causing our problem with housing affordability right now, is we've turned it into an investment, right? Dave said, I love this quote from Dave Peterson. He said, Grandma asked, I just want to be able to have a roof over my head, and now we've gone from that to wanting a castle, right? Well, there's consequences for doing that. If everyone wants a castle, that becomes very expensive, particularly when you start to inflate the money supply. So if you literally were to take that book, and then I could put you in touch with, I can't remember his name, but he's with something called the Incremental Development Group. He could give you some more information, John Anderson, about this. And that's another movement called incremental development, about how to do small-scale development in existing neighborhoods. They think differently than big-scale developers and can deliver this missing middle housing on a small scale. That's another set of solutions, but I only had 90 minutes, so go for it. Scarlett, how are you? Thank you.
Mine's kind of a follow-up to his. Have you presented this to the financial institutions and the developers? Because we're kind of like Mill Creek. I mean, we talk to developers all the time and offer what the state incentives have, and they don't want them. They just want to build what they want to build. So we could change all the laws we wanted if the people would let us. We could change them, and they still wouldn't probably be used. So have you presented this? Is it really something that people will build if we fight the fight and get it into our books? Will they build it?
Well, what I know is two things, is that I'm willing to have the conversation, and I want to have the conversation with any developer who will talk to me. And I've been trying to get there, but I was too busy doing this one. So what I would say is that I think we've heard a lot of critique of cities over the last number of years in the state and how they handle housing, things like that. But we have to remember, we have a lot of language about the free market. I believe in the free market. I was raised in a household that taught that. And that's kind of the paradigm that led me to think about this. But we also know that the term free market can be misused. It can be a counterfeit term that's used to disguise something called protectionism, which is protecting an existing business model, right? And so if we're not allowing greater choice, are we really creating in favor of a free market, right? And that's why I structure my entire presentation around the idea of choices. All we're doing is added choices. This isn't a value judgment. But then the other thing is if only 12% of people can afford these large homes, how long are they going to be able to keep selling them? And so I think that we're going to hit a peak where the demand for single-family homes, because of these changes in family structure, isn't going to be as high as it has been, and it's going to start to taper off, particularly as regulations continue to cascade and build upon one another. And I think that linchpin that's holding things is the ownership, because it can reduce NIMBYism, as both Scott and Perks and I have talked about in the past. So will they build it? It depends on the developer. And I believe it's in their financial best interest too, but it's the process of creative destruction. Whenever I think we're facing this sort of crucible moment in our history of our state and our nation on this topic, and whenever you face that change, you have to either adapt or you may go by the wayside. And I think wise developers will start to pay attention to all of the data that's saying this is what people want, and if we're not delivering on the preferences because of arcane legalities, we're not going to be able to stay in business forever because we've created this artificial scarcity, even if they are in favor of it. So something's got to give on the developer side too. I'm not against people, operating in the free market and making money, but there's a lot of people who are making very good money by making delightful communities as well, and doing good by doing well, not just by selling a very large home to the few who can still afford it. So, other questions? Go ahead.
Okay, so So how do we, how can we, how can you send us the ways we can unlock the 660 by 60 block and make it pedestrian friendly?
What are ways that we can do that?
Yeah, so.
Yeah, let's go to this slide back. I appreciate that question. The Plat of Zion is actually just an amazing planning precedent. These are, what is this, 10? I actually have probably about 40 different block designs. This was done by Duane Platter Zyberk, and then there was a competition of all the possibilities of what you could do with the Plat of Zion. And you can create the most delightful, wonderful communities. And with the mix of housing types, and the block I live on has 4 or 5 housing types in a Plat of Zion as community. So these are a number of ways that you can do that. And again, you can do anything from grow amazing, orchards in block interior to have a plaza on the interior. What's important is that this secondary street is around the perimeter, and so these become like little hamlets on the interior on those minor streets in a number of them right here and then right there, and they're very quaint. You can go into the center of the block to get away from the bustle of the city on these, or the town on the inside of those blocks. So these are a number of the ways that you can do that, and I'm happy to give you a copy of these. But I think it shows the possibilities. There's a range of block sizes. Yeah, I'll do. That's a great point, but you can come get mine after the presentation. So are there additional questions that I can answer for you? I am not, but I'm not very familiar with SITLA lands. But I think that these are SITLA and federal lands and state-owned lands are prime opportunities for community land trusts because the state has a long-term stewardship interest and the land's already paid for, right? And so you can create perpetual affordability at a much lower price than you can on privately held land that's purchased.
As a former SITLA employee, I might
Go for it.
add a little clarification there. I agree. I think it would be a great opportunity, but I think SITLA would be very reluctant to contribute lands to a trust like that because their constitutional mandate is to make as much money as they can off of the lands that they hold in trust. And so they are going to look for a way to maximize their profits, not maximize community benefit.
Well, that's okay, but we need to ask if that's ultimately in the best public interest, right? Like we are facing a massive crisis. I appreciate that. I don't want to live pie in the sky. That's very helpful. But I also think we need to, people are very in dire straits. There's a lot of people, right? So we need to think big and we need to think creatively. But that's a great technical point. So other questions, sir? Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I'd like to talk to you afterward and get more detail on that law so that I can feel like I know more than Brian. Yeah. No, that's great. I want feedback. I want any hole that you see in my arguments, I want to hear so I can make them better. So are there any other questions that you have for me? Let me ask you a question. What is your overall sense of this presentation? When you listen to this, how does it leave you feeling? How does it affect you? What's the changes in your mindset or temperament that you have? Go for it, sir.
It's great. We're providing a plethora of options, but until you change the mechanisms of the developers and the financing that we have available and the margins they're trying to achieve, all we can do is put the card in front of them and walk them through. And I think we've seen what they do. They put the highest money they can make, they build the townhomes, they're charging $50,000, $700,000 each, and I don't know, I'm frustrated.
Well, I feel your frustration. I feel your pain. I know that the fear that we're all experiencing to some degree or another. What I would say is that why do we fully wait on the developers, right? We have the ability to take action ourselves, right? Communities and towns and cities all across the country and just groups of people have become the developer, right? So who is developing also becomes the issue, right? If we're waiting on the developer to do what's in 100% in my interest, are they ever going to do something that's fully in my interest? Probably not. They may do something that's marginally or somewhat in my interest, But we need to figure out how can we take more responsibility to contribute solutions. And like the OSR land co-op, that's someone just went out and they got a long-term lease on the land, and now they're delivering a housing solution. That's a pretty specialized one, but it shows the possibility that you can do this, and you can, and then in Germany they're building these themselves, and then in DC what they're doing is they have a government that facilitates this group ownership and of residents who want to be able to have shared ownership. So there are ways to say, how can we play a different role rather than just relying on the developers to deliver what they want? They are in it for profit. We're not going to probably change that, but that doesn't mean that we don't have other tools that we can take more ownership of the issue. And this is about 1/3 of all the issues that I could have presented, but these were the most game-changing that I wanted to share with you. Question in the back.
Companion to it, in that I feel like it, provides a lot of answers to the questions that we were left with Steve's, where home ownership is so important, and we're not really going to be able to expand horizontally anymore. All the pushes to expand vertically. So, it's great to know that there are solutions for ownership opportunities in a vertical housing situation.
Yeah.
I would just echo it. It's difficult to imagine encountering developers that are excited to do this, but as we expand the knowledge base, hopefully people will be more interested in it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And what I'd also say is we can shop for the right developers. They do exist, right? There are developers that have hearts, and a lot of these concepts of walkable communities have gained much more steam outside of Utah. One of the weaknesses that I see in the planning environment in Utah is a total lack of knowledge of form-based code across the scale, and that's having massive affordability impacts negatively upwards, because it creates this cascade of missing middle housing and ownership opportunities. What I think we should have actually is a roving team to correct that FHA problem that happened in the 60s. A roving team of planners that have a public interest to go assist local communities. There used to be an example of that called the Rural Planning Group, that they would go and work on main streets. But you could take this code that was designed by a world-renowned planning firm, update it to new state requirements, and go start applying it to different communities in a way that builds trust with them and meets their planning interests. So that's another way that we could work around it. Brian, go ahead. Oh, okay. From you? Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay, Scott, go for it. Sorry, this is our last one.
Thanks. It's Scott Perks, North Logan City. Appreciate the plug. We did just finish our general plan, and one of the focuses that we had was the ownership opportunity. Mark Hansey, one of our city council members, was a champion of that and pushed that throughout the process. We appreciate his vision on that. But what we're starting to realize is the ownership opportunity. A lot that was presented in this presentation kind of puts the ball back in the developer's court, because what was presented is financing, business models, different types of mechanisms that they could bring to the city to say, hey, I want to build this product type. And as long as we have that product type as a permitted use in our code, then theoretically they could come to us with that financing model in mind and build that. But what we're realizing is if we can get the developers to build and agree to the owner occupancy, what is then the enforcement mechanism?
That's a great question. So were you finished?
Yeah, and that's where we're starting to say, hey, here in Cache Valley, we don't have a very robust housing authority. Through Bragg, there is, a small element, but we don't have a mechanism to track the transfers of ownership from one owner to the next, to the next, to the next. And
Yeah.
we just had a meeting this week with a developer that said, yeah, we understand your desire to have ownership opportunities, but how are you going to enforce that? They recognize, they've seen that does not last beyond that first owner, and it's a very difficult thing to track. So
that's an excellent point. I do think we've talked about the housing authority being tracking the deed, deed tracking. What I will say is that I don't know if community land trusts could function in that role as well. But the magic of community land trusts is they reconcile what's called the tragedy of the commons. They reconcile short-term interests and long-term interests so that you can achieve both, right, through public stewardship, or actually private community stewardship, because they're mostly 501c3s, right? And we need to look at a player that has a stewardship, just pro-social interest that's long-term in tracking those. And It could be a CLT or a housing authority that's done by the, at the county level, regional level, or the state level in some way or another. But I think that is an issue. But when you do a CLT, it takes the deed restriction issue out of it because it's enforced because they own the land. So they don't have to track ownership, right? And that's why I think that CLTs have tremendous power to be used much more broadly to preserve affordability, housing stock, and make sure that they're serving the goal of owner occupancy, right? Like one of the conditions is you can't sublet the property out, right, in a CLT. And it's enforceable because the CLT owns the land, and they can say, you're not, sorry, we own the property, we can tell you what to do on the property. So that extra teeth. So I think that we're at our time. I hope that you don't have a headache. And I appreciate your attention. I just will close with one thought, which is I wanted to start with actually what my why is. My why is because I care about people. And I see a big challenge in our society. And our Constitution was actually written in a period of about 8 weeks. They essentially locked themselves in a room, and they said, we are going to solve this problem. They are facing an existential threat. I believe that we have the capability to solve this problem, but we have to have the dedication, and we have to have a deep enough of a why. And my why is people. I care about all people. I think that all human beings matter, and that's what leads me to talk about ownership opportunities, because I want them to have the same opportunity that my parents have, that I have, and I want my children to have that same opportunity as well. So thank you for your time and your participation. Please come talk to me.